Hi, everybody. Welcome to the final week of summer 1993 month. We are going to be talking about Needful Things, which, apropos of our scheduling of this movie in the month of August, was released 30 years ago in the final weekend of August, and it
Hey,
came and went with a blip, as do most pre-Labor Day August dump releases. I saw this all the way back to like when it was on video,
yeah,
and I was never a huge fan of the movie. I think the premise is pretty amazing.
great.
Um, but my issue with the movie, and this is maybe my third or fourth time watching the movie, is that it peaks way too early. I think Max von Sydow as Leland Gaunt is really solid. It's very good casting. Ed Harris is a dependable protagonist. It's weird seeing him in this movie. I know, like, he played, or the character Alan Panghorn was also in The Dark Half, which also was a film that was adapted for the screen in 1993. And in that movie, he was played by Michael Rooker. And I've only seen The Dark Half once, but I kind of would love to have seen Michael Rooker in Needful Things as opposed to Ed Harris. Ed Harris seems like, as an actor, angry to be in the movie because, like, when he's shouting at people, it reminds me of that infamous YouTube clip where he was at like Cannes or like some film festival and he was talking about a history of violence and somebody asked him about anger and violence and then he has like a rage fit
Yeah,
in the in the Q&A. Um but he's fine. I just think that it's a 2 hour movie and I understand that there's like a 3 or 4 hour cut that was available on TBS at some point by request of the studio. I don't know how that all worked, but
okay.
it runs out of steam after Amanda Plummer's character leaves the picture. And the problem for me is the audience is so far ahead of the characters in the movie that there's nothing for us to do other than just sit around and wait.
Yeah, this movie is not very good. And when I pick it apart and I look at it again, I haven't read this book yet. I will eventually because I'm on a Stephen King run.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I can see all the King pieces in place. These are all very, very typical Stephen King characters. This is a very typical Stephen King setup. Everything makes sense here. But the problem for me here is casting and tone. Um, Not to say that there aren't great actors in this movie because there are. You've got, obviously you've got Max von Sydow. You've got, I think Amanda Plummer is right. I mean, did she walk from here over to the Pulp Fiction set? Like it's the same.
Yeah. She also did So I Married an Axe Murderer the same summer. So it's
Yeah,
all like varying levels of Amanda Plummer freak
it's
character.
a similar character. She was just yelling for a whole summer.
Yeah.
Bonnie Bedelia, like you've got actors I like quite a bit.
Mm.
But the tone is the problem here. This director who is Fraser Heston, son of Charlton,
Charlton Heston. Yeah.
um, really is playing the camp of this. He's playing
Mm.
it almost like Arch, kind of. He's got this. Oh, I kept imagining like he was looking at it as like a 50s melodramatic kind of thing, which doesn't to me really fit the story, and it doesn't really fit the actors you've hired to play these characters. I just think this whole movie is incredibly incongruous. I don't really think any one piece really fits well together with any other piece, even though some of them might be fun on their own.
Yeah. I mean, I commented to you over text while I was watching it that like I was getting a kick out of the beginning because it's like, what if Max von Sydow ran a baseball card store and he was
Right.
just talking to Mickey about Mickey Mantle cards? And I remember even in 93 or 94 when I saw this, I was just like, why did he get an autograph? That ruins the value of the card. And it's like, obviously it's not something that's like important for the movie. But I don't know. I mean, like the Bonnie Bedelia like thing with her hands seems underdeveloped. The JT Walsh stuff seems like way overdeveloped, like if
Yeah.
that's the right word. It just goes on, and he's like he was, may he rest in peace, like was a very good actor. but that's the type of thing where like the performance seems worse than it is because you didn't edit out a lot of it, because it's very one note and just goes on and on and on and on. And I feel like that's kind of more in line with the tone that Fraser Heston is trying to go for, whereas the rest of the cast isn't always in on that.
I recently started rewatching Twin Peaks. Twin Peaks is one of my favorite shows. David Lynch, my favorite filmmaker ever.
Yeah.
And rewatching a little bit of the first season and so on, I really was looking at this as, man, this is just a masterful mix of, or I should say, a masterful synthesis of actors who know exactly what they're doing, direction that is firmly got its hand firmly on tone. Lynch and Frost knew exactly what they wanted to make. They had examples to play off of. Obviously, the first, the original series of Twin Peaks playing off of the sort of prime time melodramatic kind of soap operas that were popular in the early '90s, late '80s, where if any one of those little pieces went wrong, if any of those actors weren't quite, giving a performance that matched, it would be Needful Things. That's kind of where I was at with it. I was like, everybody's kind of in their own thing, whereas on something like Twin Peaks, everybody's in it together. Similar tones. You've got that sort of arch melodramatic kind of, again, almost sort of campy delivery, but the mix is just so much better there. So I couldn't help but thinking about that when I was rewatching Twin Peaks. It kind of made Needful Things worse in retrospect.
I had a weird flashback when watching this movie because I don't know why, like just being friends, that I have this weird kind of memory association related to like when movies came out.
Mm-hmm.
So I remembered, because I was watching Needful Things, that this was like right when I first started middle school, and I think I was in like my first week of middle school, and I was talking about Needful Things in class because it had just come out, or it was coming out that Friday, and I wasn't paying attention, and I made like a giant faux pas in shop class that was like really dangerous, and like my block of wood thing got caught in like this thing to like a woodcutter, and it just started spinning in a circle, and my solution to that was to run out of the room.
Again, I'm on this Stephen King journey, and I'm looking at all these things, and I've said this before, but like it really takes a filmmaker who really understands what he's going for, how he envisions things. And frankly, I mean, I said this before, but I think the only filmmaker to really do it is Frank Darabont. I still believe that, reading The King that I've read, seeing the movies that I've seen, not to say I don't like other Stephen King adaptations. Obviously, there are other brilliant Stephen King adaptations like The Shining and Misery and so on. But Darabont is the only one where I watch his King adaptations. It feels like you're reading a Stephen King book.
Okay, interesting.
And he's the only one who, for example, The Mist, not to spoil the ending of The Mist, but the ending of The Mist is different in the book. The ending of The Mist in the book is a lot more hopeful. Darabont spun it, and again, not spoiling the ending of The Mist, but one of the most bleak, just deeply unsettling endings of all time. And King said, Frank actually improved it. He said, "I wish I had thought of that," and that's very much along those lines. So when you look at, and I know a lot of people love Mike Flanagan. No disrespect to Mike Flanagan. Mike Flanagan makes cool movies, but he makes them as a Stephen King fan rather than a Stephen King contemporary. And I do think that as our generation gets older and we start to see more and more of these films that are made as Stephen King homages or John Carpenter homages or John Hughes homages, they lose a little bit of context because we're making them as fans of the movies from our childhood. And that's the way Flanagan feels to me. Again, no disrespect to Mike Flanagan. He's a really cool filmmaker. He makes really cool movies. But I think Darabont's the only one to really nail King, to make it feel as though you're actually in his world.
Like Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny felt
Right.
that way for me, where it's like if you had like a factory, and it's like Darabont was still there making King stuff while the assembly line was running, but
Exactly.
it's like the other people, like the factory has been closed for 20 years and we're trying to like reopen the factory and understand how we made something 20 years ago.
And we're all thinking about like how cool the factory was and like wasn't it
Yeah.
cool, and really like you just remember because the fact you were 10 when the factory was open, so like so much nostalgia. It's not really that you love the thing, it's that you just loved being 10. That's what that was.
I feel bad because we kind of bait and switched everybody. This is just us talking about how
Sorry.
we're writing a movie called The Factory.
Yeah.
And it's gonna be just like Stephen King.
Yeah.
We're gonna figure out the Darabont magic. It's not gonna feel like fan fiction. It might even best King. The Factory coming soon. One thing I wanted to ask you about was I have this book about like 90s horror movies, and they always have an essay, and they're usually pretty interesting. And I mentioned it kind of in passing in the Jason Goes to Hell review last time. This one, they were saying that like the impetus for King writing the book was it was a critique on the conspicuous consumption of 80s America
Right.
and materialism. And, Walmart is kind of the stand in for like the Leland Gaunt that comes into a small town and turns it inside out and kind of ruins its specialness and uniqueness. My problem with it, and maybe it's not a book thing, maybe it's more just the movie thing, is the stuff that they're asking for in Needful Things is so kind of vanilla that I think it's like not a real good critique on, like people trying to ask for materialism. It's just
Right.
sort of like really, really kind of low stakes items like baseball cards and things like that. And if you're critiquing people who want something as kind of small as that, then you're critiquing everybody
Yeah.
like without a point. Because like we all want something like a chestnut of our youth or something like to remember, or a hobby type of item. And it's like there's nothing anti, humanity about that. It's just sort of, I don't know, I think it gets a little muddled, I guess
Yeah.
is what I'm trying to say.
And again, not having read the book, I'm sure
Yeah.
there's more context to what King is doing there. I'm sure what
Yeah.
he's, I mean, this is 91, he writes this book. So,
Yeah.
I'm sure he's very much playing into that. He's playing into the consumption of the 80s. He's using his sort of signature kind of small town wish fulfillment. And again, I look forward to reading. I hear it's not one of his better ones, but I'm so all in on King at this point that I'm just gonna read everything. So
I can kind of watch it even though I'm not a fan of it just because I like the setting so much. I think
sure.
like if there's anything that like I would say, Fraser Heston did a great job of is like setting the milieu. It kind of it's a
Yeah.
really believable town and you feel like the characters have lived there, and it's a good, kind of setup, but just what they do with it just seems like they're spinning their wheels after about the hour mark.
This wasn't quite right. Wasn't the right mix of creatives of screenplay adaptation of director. It just wasn't quite right.
So we wanted to wrap up the month by ranking the five
Yes.
movies that we covered. I just want to say before we do that, summer of 1993 was a great movie summer. This has been a real pleasure, kind of revisiting some of these with you, Rob, and with our
Yes.
audience. But I would definitely suggest, tons of other movies that we didn't cover.
Sure.
So, like, I want to give a shout out to things like Sleepless in Seattle and The Fugitive and Jurassic Park, of course, and Son-in-Law, Dragon, the Bruce Lee story, Dave. There's tons of them. So yeah, you can't go wrong with the summer '93 movie. Really,
First of all, how many movies did we watch for summer '93, Adam?
we watched five. We watched The Firm,
Yep.
Searching for Bobby Fischer, In the Line of Fire, Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Friday, and Needful Things.
All right, number 5 on my list on my ranking of these 5 would be Needful Things.
That is also my number five.
Number 4 on my list would be Jason Goes to Hell on the Final Friday.
That is also my number four.
Number 3 on my list would be. Ooh, this is where it gets tricky.
Yeah.
It's going to be In the Line of Fire.
That is also my number three.
My number 2.
I thought this would be an easy one for you.
It's easy for me, but now I'm wondering if I should. All right, no, my number 2 is The Firm.
Yeah, that's also my number two.
And my number one is Searching for Bobby Fischer. Such a
That
one.
was also my number one. That's why we're friends.
Yay! But that's
Hey,
such a like that's a, like imagine having to choose between those three movies specifically. Any
no,
one of them can have a great time.
you can't go
Wonderful.
wrong with any of them. It's funny because of the ones that we watched, Needful Things stay and The Firm, I would say, stayed about the same for
Yeah.
me. Jason Goes to Hell, I liked a little bit more than I
Mhm.
usually do. In the Line of Fire, I liked a little bit less than I usually do, but I
Right.
still enjoy it. But Searching for Bobby Fischer was the one where I got like a huge bump, where like it went from a movie I liked to a movie that I love and will probably watch a lot more often now. All right, so we'll be back next week with same title showdown of Man of the House 1995 versus Man of the House 2005. I've never seen the 2005 one, but I've seen the 95 one about 50 times. So I'm looking forward to doing the compare.
I haven't seen the new one. The new one. I haven't seen the 2005 one either. I can say I've probably seen the original, maybe once or twice. I'm not quite as well versed in it as you are, but I look forward to rewatching it.
Totally. Totally. All right. So we'll be back next week. And until then,
These seats are damned by the devil.